Alright, now we're going to another episode of the Nightmares and Dreamscapes miniseries that actually comes from the book Nightmares and Dreamscapes. And this one is going to be the fifth quarter, which, when you talk about this one, the question is going to be raised, when you're looking at adaptations, just how important is it to one specific viewer, how close it is to King's story that is in the book. Because a lot of the times, obviously, there's going to need to be changes, because even when you're adapting it to just a TV episode, because sometimes the stories can be very condensed. Like, the fifth quarter, for instance, is only about, 13 or 14 pages, which isn't that much, and the whole story just feels like a climax to a story that we get little bits and pieces of as it continues, like little backstory pieces so we know what the hell is going on. But when it starts, it does feel like we're dropped directly into the middle of something, which in a story like that, especially with the way King writes, can be really exciting. So, when they adapted that, obviously they were going to have to give us that background. There's going to be a lot that we see that wasn't addressed in the story. A lot of which involves our main character, who I don't even think is named in the story, but I believe in the episode he is Willie, and he is played by Jeremy Sisto, who I just got done praising when we talked about Waitress a few weeks ago, where Sisto is one of those actors that you've seen around, and he's like so reliable and underappreciated because he's always, pretty much always, incredible, and he's got like this perfect sort of intensity that suits especially roles like this one. So it seemed like it was good to go with this episode. So yeah, but when you look at it as itself, like even as the short story in the confines of Nightmares and Dreamscapes, it does sort of stick out a little bit in regards to what it is, because obviously King has written all kinds of different stories with all kinds of different themes, and really in all kinds of different genres, or sometimes stuff that even kind of defies any sort of genre. So to see this sort of like crime story, or what feels like the climax to a crime story, um, it feels very sort of different. And so when you look at everything that's in any of his short collections, or specifically Nightmares and Dreamscapes, it is a story that seems like it could be adaptable, but it does also feel like kind of an odd choice when you're going for a miniseries that only has a limited number of episodes, despite all the stories he's done, like, as we have addressed many times, some of which aren't even in that specific book. They're spread out through these. So, but I'm still behind the idea of this story being adapted, because it definitely sets itself up for that. But first, we get introduced to two characters we didn't know about before, which are his wife and son, who are Samantha Mathis and a very tiny Cody Smith McPhee. And it's the director of this episode is Rob Bowman, who obviously you'll see his name all over the X-Files, which is a good thing. But as far as like movies go, you'll see his name on stuff like Reign of Fire and Elektra. And it's like, the fact that you could make Reign of Fire and Elektra and still be working is kind of baffling, especially when you see the way this is put together. Like, we get this first shot of Samantha Mathis going in to reunite with him, because he's getting released from prison, which we know from the story. And we knew from the story that he's been in prison. And she's getting prepared in the car, and it is this... There's two obnoxious ways you can shoot some. There's many ways, but two in particular are the shaky cam and zooming in and zooming out for no reason. And this is doing both of those just to watch her prepare herself in the car, put makeup on and all that shit. And it's a style that it's not entirely apparent throughout the episode, but the episode, it is like visually ugly as fuck. And the reason that this stands out is because when you look at the feel of the story, when you read it in the way King describes the surroundings, where it's like, it's got like a snowy backdrop, and everything is sort of, like, there's that on the outside, and then on the inside, like when he goes into Keenan's house, there's a really great description basically saying, talking about the drabness of Keenan's kitchen, and it's kind of like they took that description. Like, if this scene just looked... If this whole episode was shot only the way it looks in just Keenan's kitchen, that would have been a perfect way to encapsulate the way Keenan's kitchen was described in the story. But the whole episode looks like that, thus making the whole episode look very drab and dreary and looks like shit. And that isn't in a way that fits the tone. Like, you can do that if it fits the tone and kind of find somewhere that makes it come through even more visually. But it's not even in that sense. It's just ugly as fuck, the whole thing. So, if you can get past that, though, and look at the story itself and the way they've adapted it, they do make some big changes here in regards to Barney and exactly what their closeness is, because we know that Barney is the character that set off the whole story, and that's why he's doing this and going after these guys and potentially the money. So this gives us a bit more of a look into that, but it adds in this whole thing of how not only were he and Barney so close, but Barney was like staying with his family while he was in prison, and then ultimately he and his wife slept together at some point, and like that's how close they all were. And to the point that he's eventually okay. He looks like he's about to kill him the rest of the way when he shows up and he's got the bullet hole in him, how we learned that he found him in the story. But then eventually it's all a whole, I guess pretty much Barney was a part of us, so what does it matter? And he's dead anyway, so fuck it. So that's... Okay, I can see where what they were kind of going for, but I don't know that it entirely works. But yeah, so another thing that I noticed was you want to, especially when you're adapting, and like I said, obviously you're going to have to stretch things out, so you add things, but it's also taking things out that could suck as well, depending on what those things are, because for the most part, despite how much they added and how different it feels, the whole of the short story is in the episode. It's just surrounded by things. And yeah, that's probably the way you'd have to do it if you were adapting that story, but you also have one moment in the story that's not in the episode, and that is how our lead character gets into Keenan's house. And in the episode, he just goes in with a gun and just pulls it on him, and that's it. And then Sarge eventually shows up. In the story, there's this great moment, and it's brief because the story's so brief, but he gets into the carport, and he gets in one of the cars and waits. And it's like really, really tense while he waits for... because he knows Sarge is coming. And so he waits in the darkness of this car in the carport, waiting for Sarge to show up so that he can get them at the same time. And it's like, that is something you really could have used when adapting this to screen. That could have been a really intense moment, and you could have dragged that out for as long as you could have to get as much tension out of it as you could. And it's just not there at all. So, that's... I didn't think that was a very good call. But going into it also talking about the different characters we're going to meet, because it is set up by Barney, as it is pretty much laid out in the story as well. We're going to run it... There's 4 quarters here. With Barney obviously out of the equation, we have, in order, Keenan, Sarge, and Jagger. And what's interesting about these 3 characters that's slowly revealed to us is that each character is going to get more threatening as we meet them. Like, each character is going to be scarier than the last. Keenan is apparently the one that shot Barney, but it becomes clear very fast in both the story and the episode that Keenan is just a little bitch. And that's it. And then Sarge is, like, unthreatened by just about everything. He's a war veteran. In the episode it's the Gulf War, in the story it's Vietnam, but either way, they make it clear in both that when Sarge is shot at, when the main character's like shooting warning shots right at him, he doesn't even move. He doesn't even flinch. That is how, like, untouchable he is. And there's this guy Jagger that's being built up that is still supposedly scarier than even Sarge is. And I like what the episode did with this, where it looked at first like they were going to take it in that they were pretty much just going to introduce the wife character solely for her to be the woman in danger character. But they have this moment where where Jagger goes to her, and we only see, like, the bottom part of his mouth, and the way they build him up, because that's the way he's built up in the story also, is in the story he's just a silhouette, and that's it. And the episode keeps to that. But they do this in a way to where they introduce him to where he's kind of built up to, which I really like. Like, he goes to Keenan's house and finishes off Keenan, and then there's, like, those 2 scenes, the scene with the wife and then killing Keenan, are the build up to Jagger being, like, the main, obstacle of this story, and it's going to be a really big moment when he's finally in the story and confronting this. But then it all kind of happens pretty quickly, and then eventually, I mean, it is similar to the story, but still, the fact that the story reads like the climax to a story, you would think that would also be the climax of the episode. But there's still some remaining stuff, because the story ends open-ended, where Jagger doesn't have his piece of the map, and there's the whole thing of, well, we can probably figure it out, we'll see what happens. And it's like, yeah, we leave him thinking, yeah, he'll probably figure it out, and then he'll be, paranoid for a while. The end of the episode decided to, and this is where I question, how much does it matter to you how close the adaptation is? Because in one case you could say, well, I hate the ending of this because I like the way the story ends, and it's not that. But it's like, if they were to do something to add on to it somehow, like we talked about with Sometimes They Come Back, the way that was, the TV movie adapted that story and changed the ending was brilliant. And it overshadowed the short story so much. And here, they take what has to be the dumbest approach they possibly could have to end this. Because when it keeps going and it decides it's going to give this story a finalized ending that King didn't give it, then it's like, okay, I can possibly get behind that, because it's almost like there's so much left over that it's like you read this story, and then the end of the episode basically feels like you're watching that story's sequel, rather than just it getting an ending. It feels like a whole other section that's like continuing the story. And this involves him going back to prison because of Barney, because his body is there. And the mystery is solved where the money is hidden because of a cereal box. And I can't still quite fathom how dumb, not just how dumb this is, but the execution of it is embarrassing. And then we have this one final scene where it's like, oh, we can't have him locked away forever because now they have the money, so what are we going to do? They pretty much negate this whole Barney thing, burying Barney outside once he's dead, because he doesn't want to go back. And it's, but it's, how these things connect, I don't, there are so many other ways out of this, I would think, than the way they took. Which shouldn't even work, because it's the whole thing of they're building it up like, oh, it's, it's self-defense or manslaughter, any of those categories you want to call it. That's all it was, because he shot me, because he got shot during the confrontation, and he'll say, oh, Barney did this, so I did that to Barney. And self-defense, the end, and he has like a cocky little smile, and I think we're supposed to assume he's going to get out of it, because the episode just ends on that. But it's like, well, I feel like, number one, as they say, you haven't even been out of prison for 24 hours yet, and you've already buried a dead body that you killed in your yard. I feel like this is a lot more complicated than self-defense. Possibly. If you can even prove that. He hasn't fully proved it when the episode just fades to black. I don't know what happened here, but, needless to say, it's a pretty disappointing outcome for a story that works by itself. Like I said, it kind of sticks out when you look at what all is here, but, it does feel like a story that's almost incomplete to a fault, even being a short story, but like I said, the way King just sort of drops us into it, he does manage to pull us in some way, and really bring suspense in those moments when he's got Sarge and Jagger here in the dark, and he's not sure what's where, and he can only see, like, lights reflecting off eyes, and that's the only way he has to go on. There's a lot you could have done with this, and it's partially in there, but it's so overwhelmed by all the shit they added that they didn't need to, it makes the story significantly dumber. So that's pretty much how I felt about what they did with this. So maybe the next one we talk about will be better, we'll see. I'm not quite sure what that is, but it should be... It should be another feature-length one, but we might do another episode. We'll see what happens. But in the meantime, we've got all the other stuff coming, like potential another versus with my brother by way of video chat, and more of these until we finish this series, and whatever else comes as far as like reviews go. So until all that stuff, that's it for this.